Have you ever found yourself wondering why, despite our best intentions maybe, and all these meticulous plans, global events often just refuse to cooperate?
Yeah, exactly. Why do foreign policies, even the ones rooted in what seem like the most noble ideals, sometimes lead to, well, completely unforeseen outcomes? Even catastrophic ones sometimes.
It's a fundamental puzzle, isn't it?
It really is. And it has huge implications for how we see the world, how we interact with it. We often assume, that spreading certain values or systems will automatically lead to peace and stability.
But the reality is it's frequently far messier than the theory suggests.
Much messier.
That's precisely the knot we're attempting to untangle today. We're diving deep into the powerful and, often controversial arguments of John J. Mearsheimer.
Right, from his 2018 book, The Great Delusion, Liberal Dreams and International Realities.
Published by Yale University Press.
And Mearsheimer poses this core question, doesn't he? He does. Basically, if U.S. foreign policy after the Cold War was so often driven by liberal ideals, spreading democracy, fostering human rights, building cooperation, why did it so consistently, maybe even spectacularly, fail?
Yeah, he points straight to the fiascos in the greater Middle East.
And the massive deterioration of U.S.-Russian relations as, prime evidence, Exhibit A and B.
So the central question we're tackling is exactly that. What went wrong? We're using Mearsheimer's framework as our guide here.
We're going to dissect these three powerful isms: liberalism, nationalism, and realism.
Right, to understand what happens when a really powerful state chases this idea of liberal hegemony without fully grasping the enduring realities of global politics.
It's about giving you, the listener, a clearer lens, hopefully, to view these fundamental forces, these forces that are often hidden but are definitely shaping our world.
Okay, so to really get Mearsheimer's view, we have to start where he does, with human nature.
Right. His foundational view. He basically says that while we humans, we can reason impressively, there are actually significant limits to our ability to ever truly agree on what the good life actually is.
And these disagreements, he argues, they aren't trivial, are they?
No, not at all. They can be profoundly deep, and they often lead to conflict.
And the real aha moment here, I think, is his point that we're fundamentally social beings.
Yes. Deeply concerned with survival. Individualism, he says, is actually secondary.
And this survival concern, it's a common thread, right? Through liberalism, nationalism, and realism.
Exactly. Each one, in its own way, is sort of rooted in ensuring its people, its constituents, endure.
He takes that idea further when he talks about how our moral thinking gets shaped.
Mearsheimer contends it's mainly driven by innate sentiments and, crucially, by socialization. From early childhood, not by pure cold reason.
He even brings in David Hume, that provocative idea.
Oh, yeah. Reason is, and ought only to be the slave of the passions. It's a powerful quote.
It really is. And this leads us to why societies need rules, right?
Precisely. Because universal truths about the good life are elusive and disagreements can get intense, political institutions become absolutely critical, essential.
For maintaining order, writing rules, controlling violence.
Both within societies and, between different groups or states. Without those frameworks, conflict is almost guaranteed.
Okay, it's at this point that Mearsheimer introduces a really key distinction, isn't it?
Yeah.
In liberalism itself.
Yes, he breaks political liberalism into two types. Think of it maybe as the difference between, one type is the state that just strictly protects your individual freedoms.
Your negative rights, speech, property, that kind of thing.
Right, and it largely leaves you alone. That's what he calls modus vivendi liberalism. It's fundamentally, you could say, pessimistic. The state is just a night watchman.
Okay, and the other type?
That's progressive liberalism. It still values those negative rights, sure, but it actively promotes what are called positive rights.
Like equal opportunity, or maybe a certain standard of welfare.
Exactly. And this demands a much more activist, interventionist state, one that's actively involved in social engineering, shaping society. It's presented as more hopeful, almost like a crusade.
So the big insight here is that progressive liberalism has largely won out. In the real world, anyway.
Right. Mearsheimer argues that the sheer complexity of modern life, especially after the Industrial Revolution, just demanded a state that was deeply engaged.
The state needed to penetrate civil society just to govern effectively.
And then there are the demands of modern warfare needing a healthy, educated population. All this pushed us towards that more interventionist model.
It's a really compelling observation because it highlights how pervasive this progressive impulse is.
Yeah, even Republican administrations in the U.S., right? Despite all the anti-government talk, they often govern with pretty progressive interventionist spending policies.
Federal spending growth under Reagan or the Bushes, for example, sometimes it outpaced Democrats.
It really underscores how deeply embedded this approach is, almost regardless of party labels. It's just the reality of the modern state.
So the liberal state, basically, it acts as rulemaker, umpire, night watchman.
But Mearsheimer emphasizes, even within these liberal states, deep disagreements about the good life are just inevitable.
Which means politics is always a struggle, isn't it? Over who gets to write the rules.
Exactly. The state can't ever be truly neutral.
Okay, so against this backdrop of liberalism's evolution, Mearsheimer then pivots. He brings in another incredibly powerful force, nationalism.
Right. He frames it as this political theory where humans are inherently divided into nations, each with strong group loyalties, always striving for congruence between their nation and its state.
And what's striking is he emphasizes how relatively recent it is.
Yeah, late 18th century, mostly in Europe. It emerges after liberalism had already taken root, which is kind of counterintuitive sometimes.
So what defines a nation, according to Mearsheimer? What are the key features?
Well, first, there's that powerful sense of oneness, a shared culture. It's fostered through common practices, beliefs, language.
And often what he calls mythical histories.
Right. These myths, he suggests, sometimes they're even invented, to maybe denigrate other nations or justify past actions. They serve a crucial purpose in binding the group together.
Nations also tend to develop this profound sense of superiority, don't they? A kind of chauvinism.
Oh, absolutely. They often see themselves as exceptional, maybe even divinely privileged, which leads to immense pride, sure, but it can also foster contempt for others.
You think about the U.S. rhetoric of being the indispensable nation.
Exactly. Or Reinhold Niebuhr's observation about Americans believing they're tutors of mankind. That kind of thinking.
Then there's the concept of sacred territory. This is huge.
Huge. Mearsheimer explains that nations develop this deep, almost emotional attachment to their perceived homeland.
Which drives this powerful impulse to secure and maintain absolute sovereignty over it.
And this territory is often seen as indivisible. Like China's unwavering view of Taiwan, it's sacred territory, even if it risks war.
That's a big shift from older states where territory was sometimes just an asset to be traded.
A massive shift. And finally, there's popular sovereignty. This is key to the nation-state.
Supreme authority rests not with a king claiming divine right,
but squarely with the people, the citizens. That concept is absolutely central.
And the nation itself, Mearsheimer argues, it basically serves as a powerful survival vehicle.
Yeah, its cohesive culture, its drive for self-determination, it maximizes its member survival prospects, it helps build strong security forces.
And it clearly defines who's an outsider.
Right. It creates that powerful us versus them dynamic, which can be invaluable when you're facing external threats.
And this is how nationalism became the engine behind the rise of the powerful modern state, wasn't it?
Precisely. By generating such deep loyalty, a nation could mobilize and extract far greater resources, far more manpower than any dynastic state ever could.
Napoleon's army is the classic example.
It transformed warfare. Became a juggernaut, he calls it. It basically forced other states to adopt similar nationalist models just to survive. Made the old dynastic states obsolete.
Okay, so when we put nationalism up against liberalism in practice, this is where Mearsheimer makes a really provocative claim.
He does. He argues nationalism is just far more powerful and pervasive than liberalism. He even calls it liberalism's non-liberal underbelly.
The idea being that a purely liberal state isn't really feasible, that liberalism actually needs that national community foundation to even function.
That's exactly his argument. And he backs it up by pointing to what he calls the softness of rights in practice. Meaning, when individual rights clash directly with political stability or the nation's welfare, people, in his view, often prioritize stability.
He gives examples, right? Like Russia in the 90s.
Yeah, the attempt at Western democracy led to such chaos and corruption that the population ultimately chose order over freedom.
Or even Abraham Lincoln during the U.S. Civil War, suspending habeas corpus, censoring mail.
Right. It shows that even in a liberal democracy, rights can be curtailed when there's a perceived extreme emergency.
This really brings up that important question from Hannah Arendt, doesn't it, about universal rights?
Her point that they're essentially meaningless without a government to enforce them.
She thought nationally guaranteed rights were far more reliable because there's no higher power in the international system to protect human rights beyond the state.
Exactly. And Mearsheimer pushes this even further. He highlights what he calls the authoritarian temptation. His controversial claim that when liberal democracies face severe threats, they can, under pressure, start adopting characteristics you usually associate with authoritarian states.
Making it easier to curtail rights at home.
Right. So paradoxically, he argues that pursuing liberal hegemony abroad can actually actively erode liberal values domestically.
Okay, let's turn now to that grand ambition itself. Liberal hegemony. What exactly is it?
It's a foreign policy strategy, basically. A powerful state aims to maximize the number of liberal democracies around the world.
Build international institutions, promote an open international economy.
Yeah, essentially trying to spread its own values and system everywhere. Remake the world in its image, you could say.
But Mearsheimer believes this liberal interventionism is, well, fundamentally doomed to fail.
He does. Why? Because foreign cultures, he says, have deep, resilient roots. They're incredibly hard to transform from the outside.
And nationalism, that desire for self-determination, it inevitably leads to fierce resistance against foreign interference.
No matter how good the intentions might seem. Plus, he argues, most people abroad just don't prioritize individual rights in the same way the liberal crusaders do.
And crucially, other states in the system, they're likely to respond with what Mearsheimer calls realpolitik, right?
Exactly, that balance of power logic, not with liberal ideals. So the liberalizer inevitably meets stiff resistance.
And we saw this play out, didn't we? In painful detail after 9/11 in the greater Middle East.
Absolutely. Think about Iraq. Afghanistan, despite massive U.S. investment, comparable to the Marshall Plan for Afghanistan.
Huge sums.
The U.S. failed to install stable democracies. Both countries just spiraled into civil war, endless conflict.
And the instability didn't stop there. Interventions in Libya, Syria, Egypt. They were brief, but had massive consequences.
Widespread civil wars, huge humanitarian crises, just extensive disorder. The European refugee crisis, for example, was heavily fueled by the Syrian conflict, where U.S. actions definitely played a part.
Mearsheimer's point is that these interventions, far from promoting democracy or rights, ultimately just spread death and disorder.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you look at the Ukraine crisis, it serves as this really stark example, doesn't it? Liberal assumptions crashing head-on with realist realities.
Mearsheimer argues, controversially, that the crisis was mainly provoked by Western policy, specifically NATO expansion.
Right. Despite the West's liberal intentions, building a security community by integrating Eastern Europe, Russia saw it totally differently.
As a direct existential strategic threat. Not some benevolent outreach program.
Precisely. It just wasn't perceived that way in Moscow at all.
It really echoes George Kennan's warning back in '98, doesn't it? Against NATO expansion.
That prophetic warning. He said, I think the Russians will gradually react quite adversely. I think it is a tragic mistake. There was no reason for this whatsoever. Chilling, really.
And there's another crucial layer to Mearsheimer's critique, the domestic costs.
Yes. Pursuing liberal hegemony abroad, he argues, incurs significant costs at home. It actively erodes liberal values right here.
James Madison's warning comes to mind. No nation can preserve its freedom in the midst of continual warfare.
That constant engagement abroad, it inevitably fosters a powerful national security state.
And the perceived demands of foreign policy often require secrecy. Even deception, right, which fundamentally undermines transparency at home.
We've definitely seen examples. The Bush and Obama administration's surveillance programs, drone strikes, the treatment of whistleblowers like Snowden or Manning.
Lying, spinning, concealment, they become routine tools when national security is invoked.
And this leads directly to diminished civil liberties. Mearsheimer points to specific examples.
Warrantless surveillance of Americans, indefinite detention at Guantanamo.
The Obama administration's kill list, the expanded drone strikes. These actions, he argues, starkly show how U.S. leaders have been willing to curtail fundamental rights when they felt the country faced an extreme emergency.
It makes you wonder how conditional our freedoms really are.
It does.
So, okay, on the other side of the spectrum, we have these noble aspirations, right? Three main liberal theories of peace that try to supersede realism entirely.
Yeah. First is democratic peace theory, the idea that democracies just don't fight each other because of shared values, respect for rights, peaceful conflict resolution, that sort of thing.
Second, economic interdependence theory.
Right. Trade and investment bind states together so tightly that the economic costs of war become just too high. Prosperity becomes a stronger incentive than conflict.
And third, liberal institutionalism.
This one argues that international institutions like the UN, WTO, etc. foster cooperation and peaceful dispute resolution. They set up shared rules and norms.
But Mearsheimer offers some pretty strong, maybe even blistering critiques of these ideas.
Oh, yeah. On democratic peace theory, he's blunt. Democracies do fight each other. He points to historical examples.
U.S. versus Britain, War of 1812, U.S. versus Spain, 1898.
France-Britain versus Egypt in 56. Ecuador versus Peru. Even a few cases like that, he argues, are enough to basically undermine the theory's statistical significance. It's not an iron law.
And when it comes to economics, does prosperity always win?
He argues forcefully, no. Political calculations, especially about national survival and the powerful pull of nationalism, often override economic incentives.
World War I happened despite massive European economic integration.
Right. And China, he notes, seems willing to risk huge economic damage over Taiwan because nationalism is just a stronger force for them.
And sanctions often fail, don't they?
Precisely because nationalism makes populations rally around their leaders. They endure hardship rather than give in.
Okay, what about institutions? Are they the answer?
Mearsheimer argues they're inherently weak. International institutions just lack any real higher authority to enforce their rules.
So they become largely irrelevant when great powers have genuinely conflicting interests, especially on security.
That's his point. States, he maintains, will simply act in their own self-interest when the chips are down, regardless of what the institutional rules say.
So the core problem, Mearsheimer emphasizes, is that none of these theories can actually guarantee the absence of war.
Exactly. And as long as there's even a small lingering chance of war, states have to prioritize their survival. They have to act according to realist principles.
It's like nuclear deterrence, maybe. The chance is low, but the consequences are so dire you have to factor it in.
That's a good analogy. The potential cost forces a certain kind of behavior, even if the probability seems low.
So if liberal hegemony is, as Mearsheimer claims, this great delusion, what's the alternative path?
He calls for a fundamentally different approach, a foreign policy rooted in realism and restraint.
Realism's harsh realities, as he sees them. International politics is often a nasty and brutish business.
Right. Great powers, he argues, are often compelled to compete for power, even start wars, for perfectly sound strategic reasons. It's not always about bad leaders or flawed ideologies.
So a restrained U.S. foreign policy, in his view, would mean focusing military intervention only where it's vitally important strategically.
Yeah, its own neighborhood, areas where other great powers are located, Europe, East Asia, and critical resource areas, like the Persian Gulf.
You don't intervene just for ideological reasons to spread democracy.
No. And history, he says, offers lessons here. U.S. interventions in minor powers during the Cold War, like Vietnam.
Often unnecessary and incredibly costly.
Exactly. Nationalism turned out to be a much stronger force than either communism or liberalism. These smaller powers fiercely resisted outside influence. They want self-determination above all else.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, and, well, current politics? Mearsheimer points to Donald Trump's 2016 campaign.
Right. It resonated with many voters precisely because Trump explicitly criticized liberal hegemony.
He opposed spreading democracy abroad, called NATO obsolete, pushed protectionism.
Directly challenging that whole liberal international order that had been dominant for decades.
He concludes then that the experiment of liberal hegemony has pretty much failed.
Definitively failed, in his view. And the path to a more effective foreign policy, he suggests, lies in building a kind of counter-elite, people committed to a realist, restrained approach.
Drawing on a long, maybe sometimes overlooked tradition of restraint in American history.
Right. The evidence of failure, he thinks, should compel people to at least be open to an alternative.
So throughout this deep dive, we've really explored Mearsheimer's core tension, haven't we? This clash between those big liberal dreams of transforming the world.
And the enduring, often uncomfortable realities of nationalism and great power politics. It's a clash that just keeps playing out.
His central argument that liberalism fundamentally needs that non-liberal underbelly of national community to even work.
It's a really powerful one. A purely liberal state, in his analysis, just isn't feasible in the real world.
And this leaves us with a truly thought-provoking question, I think. Mearsheimer explains how nations often alter or rewrite history. They create these myths to give themselves ancient roots or make themselves seem exceptional.
Yeah, history gets shaped to fit the national narrative.
So if our understanding of national identity, and maybe global politics too, is partly based on these, let's say, convenient narratives, rather than the deeper, often uncomfortable truths about power and identity that Mearsheimer highlights,
then what myths might we be believing today about the world around us, about our own nations, perhaps without even realizing it?
Something to think about.